Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of What If RuneScape, the series where we take an idea and stretch it out as far as it can possibly go. Today we're going to be talking about Fossil Island. Fossil Island was an awesome update when it came out 7 years ago, and since then a few new things have been added to the game or changed, and I feel like Fossil Island should be updated. There shouldn't be just a couple of small tweaks for quality of life. I think there should be a Fossil Island Part 2. And we've already built up to an expansion of sorts throughout the history of Fossil Island as well. So before we talk about the island specifically, I think we need to talk about the Varrock Museum, because that's pretty much the vessel in which we get to Fossil Island. And there's almost nothing for completing the Varrock Museum. Sure, it is nice, and I would even argue necessary for you to get those experience lamps along the way, but there's no reward for when you complete the museum. It would be nice if there was the tangible or intangible reward, something like getting the curator's eyeglasses that kind of look like the Master Clue spectacles. It could be a unique equipable item and a reward for completing the museum. And it doesn't have to be worn, but when you get these glasses, they enhance your ability to discover fossils, and they also increase your chance of finding treasure trails on Fossil Island. And now that we've gotten to Fossil Island, I want to go in the water immediately, because we need to talk about the underwater activities. There's a few. I think it might be nice if we had some sort of underwater construction activity. Something where we're looking for sunken boats. And then we can use the construction, smithing, and magic skills to salvage and gather materials from the wrecks. We could either use that material for resources on the island, or maybe we have a chance of restoring the boat. And there could be a couple of different uses for these boats. If we restore a boat, that could end up being travel between Fossil Island and some of the smaller surrounding islands. If we restore the boat, it could end up being a prized piece in the museum to expand upon the Varrock Museum. Especially after sailing comes out, there could be a few more things to add. And while we're talking about sailing, just restoring the final boat around Fossil Island could actually be your very first sailing ship. And Fossil Island could end up being a home base for sailors if it's not going to be Varlamore. I just talked about the small islands surrounding the island, and some of the NPCs do as well. There could be plenty of different things on these smaller islands, and now that we've unlocked travel to them through our construction activity underwater, we might be able to find things like larger herbivores. Something like an herbivore, but for combat. You're not gaining herblore experience or gaining combat experience, but you're still gaining around the same amount of herbs. And there are several different islands, so that leaves a lot of different rooms for variation of monsters if we didn't want to go too crazy. There could just be an island that has more ammonite crabs, but we could even change the size or level of these crabs. There could be small ammonite crabs, normal ammonite crabs, and we could find some large ammonite crabs to be like giant sand crabs, giving us a couple of more places to AFK. And we have a large tar swamp, a part of Fossil Island that I feel is underutilized, especially since the tar monster drops almost nothing. We should totally revitalize the loot table for that, and maybe tweak it to be something that's more helpful for accounts that could be Fossil Island locked. And we could do that by having small, medium, and large tar monsters as well. It might be a nice variation every time you go into the tar swamp, not to see that big thing shooting at you, but its little cousin. And the house on the hill should really have an underground network that connects it to the rest of the caves underneath Fossil Island. Maybe it could even connect us to some of the smaller islands if they have an underground system. Or maybe even a connection to the underwater areas. And all throughout this massive cave system, there could be the ancient Zygamites. But while they're down in the ground away from sunlight, you don't need that stupid bug spray. So you can go on a killing rampage of all of these little mushroom guys. But the thing is, these mushroom guys have been transforming these caves all throughout. So some of these caves are looking good. They got a lot of green around them, glowing mushrooms everywhere. And I think this cave would be really cool and stand out apart from some of the other caves in OSRS. But in the center of this gigantic cave, I would like there to be a new boss monster. The Wyvern Mother. It could end up being a battle like Vorkath, but all about its icy breath. There could be a bunch of different things that a wyvern could do, like flying up in the air and swooping down, and you couldn't hit it while it's flown up in the air unless you had ranged attack. Its freezing breath is already a part of normal wyvern attacks, but there could be ice spikes that come out of the ground because of that freezing breath periodically, so that could be an obstacle that you end up having to avoid, like the rock for Leviathan. And an easy way to sweep the board, if it gets too messy, is a 360 tail swipe. So that could end up being something that the player has to run all the way back to the end of the room to avoid that big tail. This would end up being a boss that uses melee and magical attacks, and it would totally drop things like the wyvern shield, a wyvern head to mount in your player-owned house, a boss pet of the Wyvern Mother, and it should probably drop some things like scaly blue dragon hide, and it would be nice if it was superior wyvern bones, like how Vorkath drops superior dragon bones. And who knows, maybe this could be a way for us to introduce icy breath potions, the opposite of dragon breath potions, but it protects you against their icy breath, much like the wyvern shield would. And I saved this one for last because I think this is actually something that they messed up on in the first version of Fossil Island when they first put it out. So there are technically 3 different currencies a part of Fossil Island. You have Numelite, Mermaid Tears, and Volcanic Mind Points. Mermaid Tears, they're actually a currency that you would want to gather. There's a store that you can use the currency in, and they have a specialized currency, Glistening Tears, that you get every so often that you can turn in for XP. The Volcanic Mine shop buys all the different things in the Volcanic Mine, like ores and uniques a part of Volcanic Mine. But the fact that there's a shop is miles ahead of what Numelite has. It's almost nothing. Every now and then you'll be charged Numelite to do something, but it feels incredibly arbitrary, and there's not even like a shop where you can buy things with Numelite. So that's something I think should change now. Even if we don't get Fossil Island Part 2, there should be a shop introduced. And it could have different things that you might need for Fossil Island. Like, you can eventually buy the herb pouch for Herbivore, but that'd probably be a lot of Numelite. Eventually. And if we're going to keep going in the same theme, we could also buy herb boxes for a decent amount of Numelite too. There's already restrictions on how many herb boxes you can buy, so there's no reason why you can't just use your leftover Numelite on it. Seed packs, another place to buy them with Numelite, might be nice. Or at the very least, being able to buy basic seeds so that way we can use those for our birdhouses. And it could just sell a whole bunch of different tools for doing birdhouse runs, tools for the underwater fishing, or tools for the hardwood tree farming, all bought with Numelite. And maybe there could be an exchange rate between Numelite and the Mermaid's Tears, just to make it a little bit easier to gather all those up if you're still trying to complete all of the things a part of Fossil Island. And one more thing to make Numelite actually on the same tier as the Glistening Tears, a glistening Numelite might be nice. All of the activities that we do that gather Numelite, which happen to be a lot, could end up giving us a glistening Numelite every so often, much like a glistening tear. We'd be able to turn this in for an experience lamp, and it could be just one more reason for you to do your training on Fossil Island. So what do you guys think about Fossil Island Part 2? What would you add if you had a chance to add something to Fossil Island? And do any of these ideas resonate with you? If so, leave it down below or just tell me how much you didn't like it. I'm sure you'll do that anyway. But until next time, everybody, I will see you all later. And don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe.